Hello, my name is Karina Lockhart, and this is my interpersonal communication project for Human Services Counseling 508 at Liberty University.
I will be covering the following topics within the project: what interpersonal communication is, my overarching goal and how this will help enlarge the conversation, my background on behavior blend, potential barriers in my communication, noise pollution, and an action plan to improve the effectiveness of my communication. What is interpersonal communication? According to Stewart, this is the type or kind of communication that happens when the people involved talk and listen in ways that maximize the presence of the personal. When communication emphasizes the persons involved rather than just their roles or stereotypical characteristics, interpersonal communication is happening. My overarching goal is to develop a continuous self-awareness in my communication with others by improving and utilizing mindfulness as well as utilizing the talker-listener card concepts. I believe that by incorporating these two things, I will be able to encompass and troubleshoot most of my challenge areas. Enlarging the conversation, which is identifying the needs in a conversation and intentionally utilizing and putting to work all of our effective communication resources to address those needs. This results in healthier relationships and more satisfying communication. It also enables productive conflict, which is defined in Stewart's book as an interaction that reflects a sustained effort to bridge an apparent incompatibility of positions. So, if I'm able to talk and listen effectively, as well as manage conflict productively, this concept will be evident and helpful in both my personal and professional life. Now I will go over some of my background and how this has affected the way I communicate. I was raised in a single-parent household. I wasn't exposed to very much couple conflict and really didn't have much of an idea on the ins and outs of relationship communication until I was married. But I also learned from a very young age to speak up for myself, as my mother was a good example of an independent and confident communicator. I'm a Christian. This influences my vision of who I want to be as a person and a communicator. Christ is the ultimate example, and this has served as a guide for what and how I communicate, as I know I am called to reflect him as a Christian. I struggle with certain areas that I will discuss shortly, but I hope that I am able to serve others as I continue to grow closer to him and as I'm made aware of certain communicating shortcomings. I'm also Latina. Culture, as one can imagine, has had a big impact on my communication. This is something that has infiltrated all aspects of my life, both positively and negatively. I'm an oldest sibling, and as the eldest, I felt responsible to be an advocate for my siblings. I believe this is one of the main reasons my blend is what it is, which we will discuss shortly. Marriage and motherhood have brought new dimensions into my old way of communicating. I've had to really stretch my comfort zones, but it has also influenced my communication style in a very positive way, as it has motivated me to make necessary changes for the improvement of my family functioning. Working at a nonprofit agency with children, teens, and families has influenced my way of communication in a positive way, as it has put me in positions of self-awareness and given me tools for overcoming certain challenge areas. Behavioral blend. To give you a little background, I've included a couple of images that help understand each of the personality types. Most people are a blend of two or more, but I will briefly sum up the overall tendency for each type. D, active, task-oriented. I, active but people-oriented. S, passive, people-oriented. C, passive, task-oriented. I was able to take the personality test on uniquelyu.com, and according to the results, my behavioral blend is DC, both on what is expected of me and who I am. Now I will go more in depth regarding my specific DISC personality type. Most DC types think people expect them to be both dominant and competent, very task-oriented. How others actually see them, distant and unresponsive, or in control and competent. Their visions are often clear-cut and focused on finishing well, tend to be more committed to tasks than to relationships. Leadership style tend to be a direct and detail-oriented leader, delegate tasks well, not very easygoing, seem to lack enthusiasm and excitement. Following style, great follower when they trust and respect their leaders. Strengths, getting tasks done well, can multitask well. Weaknesses, focuses more on tasks than relationships. I agree that most of these are my natural tendencies, and it was somewhat disappointing to see that the characteristics I valued most regarding my work ethic and multitasking talents could actually be so harmful if abused. This opened up a door in becoming aware of my communication challenges and helped me understand where they came from. Something I find necessary to point out is that through personal and professional life experiences, there were some natural barriers that had already been dealt with. This proves that self-awareness can lead to intentional overriding of one's natural tendencies. I hope that inspires the listener as much as it has inspired me to not give up in this journey of achieving effective communication. I was also able to take an interpersonal communication skills test off of Queendom. I scored an 82 out of 100, and it put me in the insightfulness category. I think this was one of the main reasons I felt called to the human services field. I also think that this comes from the fact that I was brought up in an empathetic and Christian home, which encouraged this type of listening. I believe my current job as a counselor has certainly influenced this as well. Potential barriers. Throughout the course, we had the opportunity to reflect and assess ourselves alongside our readings and discussion boards by journaling. I know that there are many interpersonal communication challenges I face, but in these next few slides, I will be focusing mainly on the points I made in my reflective journals. There are also common potential barriers mentioned in the books, but as this project is self-evaluative, I will be listing my specific communication barriers. A last note before entering this section, according to Philippians 4:13, with God, all things are possible. I believe that the closer I get to Him and immerse myself in studying and meditating on Him, the more my character molds to His purpose for me. So although I list ways to combat my barriers, I think seeking Him first is the most important solution. The first potential barrier is task-oriented tendency taking priority over relationships. Carbonell gives advice on this, and he explains that a mature DC understands his or her drives and where he or she is headed. I believe this means I need to understand my natural tendencies, but externalize them so that I can see the big picture. Life is not all about accomplishing tasks. Life without relationships is not what God has called us to. Finding a balance is the solution for this. The second potential barrier I mentioned is communication traps. According to Peterson, memorizing the most common communication traps is the best way to avoid them. And if I'm already in the trap, re-say what you intend to say, or listen and find out what they were trying to say. A third potential barrier is defensiveness. This concept is mentioned in all of the textbooks because of the damage it can cause in communication. The most practical solution I found was Peterson's way of explaining it. In his flat brain theory, Peterson calls the impact of a hit to the gut as a thud. The thud is anything that makes you uncomfortable in the communication. One can either choose to let it swell the gut area, which leads to the heart hardening and then the brain flattening, or not. This concept has helped me to realize or to recognize this and has given me the tool I needed to be able to listen instead of react. This can be applied to other areas, but in the case of defensiveness, instead of reacting to what was said to me personally, I try to hear what the person is trying to tell me they need. It is difficult, very difficult, but Peterson recommends we take a deep breath and ask the person to repeat their statement so I can rehear it without taking it personally. Shift into listening mode and support the other person. A fourth potential barrier is the lack of mindfulness or mindlessness. Mindfulness is focused attention on the present. It is the opposite of mindlessness, where attention is focused on the future. Things I need to do is avoid multitasking when communicating, avoid planning on what I'm going to say next instead of truly listening. I also need to learn to be mindful with my own self-talk. Greater mindfulness prior to and during communication can accrue substantial benefits in a variety of important practical communication contexts. I've included this in my overarching goal because I think that if I approached all communication mindfully, I would be attuned to the other person, thus producing effective communication and healthy relationships personally and professionally. Mindfulness is something I have found to cherish in my life in general, and I believe it helps one become the listener we need to be as human service professionals and as Christians. which leads me to the following slide. Effective listening. What effective interpersonal communication comes down to, at least to me, is effective listening. Because if we are truly and mindfully listening, we are better able to see the bigger picture. We're able to realize when we fall into traps and correct ourselves. We're able to hear what a person is trying to communicate through their verbal and nonverbal communication. The following tips are just a few of the ones that stood out and have helped me personally. They have been retrieved from our course textbooks as well as from a journal article referenced at the end of the presentation. Use mindfulness. Use empathy. Don't interrupt. Don't give advice. Don't try to problem solve. Leave judgments out. Keep an open mind. Learn to recognize the thuds and harness defensiveness. Reflect on what I'm being told. Essentially, these can all be summed up by using the talker-listener card, and that is why I included the talker-listener card in my overarching goal. Noise pollution. Internal noise pollution are internal distractions or barriers that prevent us from listening effectively. These can be psychological, like selective or ritual hearing, biases, stereotypes, and others can be physiological, like hunger or fatigue. External noise pollution are distractions, external distractions or barriers that prevent us from listening effectively. These are things like a talker's voice, tone, and volume, outside noises like traffic and machinery, room temperature, or work pressures. Possible remedies: using the aforementioned effective listening strategies, keeping our biases and preconceived notions in check, and accepting what we can't control, like some of the external noise pollution examples, and working to improve what we can, like internal noise pollution and some external noise pollution. The following is the action plan I've developed to improve my communication skills. First things first, as I mentioned before, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Mindfulness and continuous self-awareness. You need to remember that relationships are more important than tasks. You need to use the talker-listener card concepts. You need to remember the flat brain theory and Peterson's drawing, which will keep an image in my mind and hopefully help me to carry those concepts through. I've compiled a few verses to help me remember what the Bible says about communication. Change is hard, but I have a calling to fulfill and I can't adequately serve without necessary and positive changes in my character. I'm thankful for the opportunity I've had in this course to really zoom in on some of my communication challenges and how to face them. I'm excited as to how God will use me as I go through this journey of change. Thank you for your time.